Students, I just want to go over very quickly how to go about finding some of the information regarding how to go about writing a lab report. So if you go to Blackboard, and at the time when I'm recording this is for the fall of 2025. If you go to the lab content, Chem 103 Lab XA, and some of you were asking, where do I find some of the example problems of how to write a lab report? I have mine set up on first day, first day. And then down here, I have sections for lab reports, how to go about setting up your lab notebook, and also handouts like your syllabus. So the part, how to go about writing a lab report, is in this section. And then I have a couple files here that will aid you in writing your lab report. So I have a PowerPoint, and then also I have an example lab report. Now to show you the PowerPoint. So here is a little something I put together. This is actually kind of a collection of work from several of the other professors, but I try to put this together in a PowerPoint that hopefully will make sense to you. So on this page, I'm just trying to show you that the main parts of the lab report, you're going to have like your title page, and all it is just a single page. Now, if you click on these, if you go into presentation mode and you click on these are hyperlinks, but I'm just going to quickly go flip through the slides. So again, your first page is the title page, that's all it is. Then all the following pages are going to be this information, and then like the last couple pages are going to be your conclusions and references. So with the abstract I have on here, it's going to be single space, introduction, that's going to be double space, experimental, double spaced, results and discussion, double space, conclusion, it's going to be double spaced. Now when you get to references and appendix, it's a little bit different. It's going to be single spaced, but double spaced between each new reference or between each new appendix. Then, so for the title page, it's some information about how to go about setting up the title page, and then just kind of a simple example of how to set it up. So like the title, typically kind of big letters, big font, your name, your partner, the class, who your professor is, the date, something along those lines, and then that's all it is. And then getting into the abstract, it gives some information about what is an abstract, and what is the purpose of the abstract. And one thing I would say here is that the abstract is in one paragraph a very short, concise statement about what was done. It's one analogy is it's like you're trying to tell the entire happenings of a movie in the time it takes for you to ride an elevator, like from beginning to end. If you had to, in just a few, rather than less than a minute, if you had to tell the entire plot of what happened in a movie, that is basically your abstract. So within an abstract, there are four main parts, and just a little bit more details about each one of those four parts. And each one of those four parts needs to be combined together into a single paragraph. So within that paragraph, the first one or two sentences is going to be talking about the topic, the research question, or the objective of the lab. Then you're going to spend about one or two sentences of that paragraph talking about the methods, and then about one or two sentences talking about the results, and then one or two sentences talking about the conclusion. So all this is going to be making up a paragraph anywhere from about 4 to 8 sentences roughly. And so kind of breaking each one of these down a little bit further here again, so about 1 or 2 sentences talking about your introduction or the objective, and just some information of exactly what is the introduction, what is the objective, what type of questions you should be asking or answering within those first 2 sentences of the abstract. And then the next 1 or 2 sentences, how do you go about explaining the methods section of that paragraph, and how do you go about explaining the results of that paragraph. And then how do you write the conclusion for that paragraph? And then some do's and don'ts of writing an abstract. And then, even though the abstract is typically the first part of a report, most often that is actually the last thing that you write of a lab report. And then some additional helpful hints and some other information, and then just a few examples of some good and bad abstracts. So you can read through these, and hopefully you can kind of see what makes a good abstract and what does not make a good abstract. And then get into the introduction. Now, for the first lab report, when we start getting into when you're analyzing the sports drinks, you do not have to write the introduction. Now, for your full lab report, you will be. So you can read through this, and it gives you information about the introduction. Again, for the first submission that you're going to be doing, you will not be writing an experimental portion, but when you do write your full lab report, you will be. And some information about writing the experimental. Now, you will be writing the results, or the results and discussion section. In this part, next format, it will be double spaced. It's going to be written in paragraph form, and gives you some information about setting up the tables and labeling them. And it kind of goes on. You can read over this. And then again, for the first submission that you're going to be doing, you will not be writing a conclusion. But when you do write the full lab report towards the end of the semester, you will be writing a conclusion. And then references. Main thing about references, essentially, nearly everything you submit should have a reference. It could even be the handout that was given to you that can also be referenced, about how do you go about setting your references, a few different formats of how do you set up your references. Now, you'll also be, for the first submission, you will be attaching an appendix, and the appendix is single space, but it's double space between each new entry. And here is an example of one. I'm going to show you another example with the sample lab report. And within the appendix, when you're doing calculations, here are improper ways of setting it up. Here are some proper ways of setting it up, and some explanations here in the middle. So, for example, if you're dividing a 10 grams, if you're taking 10 grams divided by 5 grams per mole to get 2 moles, the way this thing is set up is not proper. Typically, the proper way of doing it is you would have the formula, and then when you're writing out the formula, you would have 10 grams, and then physically put the 10 grams over the 5 grams per mole is equal to 2 moles. So this would be a proper setup. The way this is written is not done well. This is even worse, and this is even just as bad here, where the fact that you're saying divided by rather than using the division here. So that is really bad. Okay, so never ever show me a formula that's written in this format or this format or even this format. The way it should be written here is something like this. And some additional information. Again, you can read this on your own. One thing about writing, in scientific writings, the writing is very bland. There's no flowery statements to it. You're straight to the point. It's written in past tense because you've already done everything. Like when you're writing out numbers, what are the proper ways of writing out numbers? And then also, like when you're setting up data tables, on a spreadsheet, it'll have it where text is on one side, values are on the other side. Either left justify or center justify your columns. and some information here. So let me switch over to so here's a sample lab report. So let me scale down just a little bit so you can see. So what you see here is a sample lab report, the title, and then the author's name, who the lab partner is. The lab partner is after the author's name, the class, and the date. Here you can see the abstract. It is single spaced, and it's only just a few sentences long. So the first one or two sentences, that is where you're talking about the objective. The next one or two sentences is talking about how the procedure was done. The next one or two sentences is talking about what type of results did they get. You know, you're not telling the details in the data table. It's like, what is the end result? What was if it was a football game, it is like, what was the final score? You're not telling me play by play what was going on. And then the last sentence is the conclusion. You're basically kind of wrapping up this paragraph. Now again, for this first report that you're going to be submitting, you will not be doing an introduction, but here is an example introduction. I'll talk about writing up these formulas here. You will not be writing an experimental, at least not for this report. You will have a results and discussion, and this is perhaps the most important part of the report. And one of the key things I want to draw your attention to is that, let me first go down here. So here's a table. All right, so we have the rows and columns. We can see trial 1, 2, and 3. But with this table, there is a title to this table. So it's called table 1. You identify which table it is. So you have like table 1, 2, 3, 4. It always goes in sequential order. Table 1's first, table 2 is second, table 3 is third. Okay, do not go in different orders. The other thing is too, is you give a title to this table. Just kind of a short little description about this table. Then, in the paragraph above it, they talk about the data. So they'll talk, in this situation, they talk a little bit about the table, but also if you notice here, is that they mention the table. You always reference the table that you're talking about. Okay, so, and you talked about the data and you reference the table. And then you'll see this again. So here is table 2. Here is the data in table 2. And then, but if you'll notice in the paragraph right before it, they're talking about the information. They reference the table right here, which matches this title down here. And even if they mention it again, you don't have to mention the whole title, but you can just say table 2. So the same thing with this, is that you always reference the table. Never have a table, never have a figure that's out there by itself. If you show it in the report, you need to talk about it. And it also too, when you're writing out the report, you do not talk. You don't just repeat what you see in here. You talk about like what type of trends are taking place, or what does this data mean? Now, in this report, there is no figure, but you could have like table 1, table 2. If you have a graph, that's called a figure. Or if you have a drawing, you call it a diagram. So you could have like table 1, table 2, table 3, and then all of a sudden you have a graph. So you will call it figure 1. And then if you have another chart after that, then you will call it table 4. And then if you have another graph, that becomes figure 2. So you basically go in sequential order. So tables 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, figure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, diagrams 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you go. You don't go table 1, figure 2. I'm trying to think of a way to explain this here, but like if I were to have a figure, a graph in between here, it will go table 1, then we'll call it figure 1, and then I would have another table, I will call it table 2. So hopefully that makes sense. And then you will not be writing a conclusion for this upcoming report, but you will have an appendix. And the key thing about an appendix is that it's typically single space, but you double space it in between each new appendix. And the appendix is where you show like sample calculations. Now, if you are doing like multiple calculations, you only have to show like one example calculation. So like in this situation, there's a title for this appendix, for this calculation. It's kind of, what are you calculating? And in this one here, it kind of shows a little bit better where you have the second one, what is the calculation? And then typically within an appendix, you have three parts, especially if you have a calculation with a formula. You'll show the formula. All right. So here is the formula for it. And you have mass of chloride over the mass of solution times 100. Then you have basically the same thing, but you now put in the numerical values. And then the third part is you show the answer. So formula, show the work, show the answer. And when you're doing this, it's very important that you have the units. If you do not have the units, that is incorrect. You always want to show the units. So I have this one is set up where like one is over the other one. You can even do it this way where you have the formula, and then they plug in the values, and then you have the answer. But you should always have the formula, the values with the units, and then the final answer. Okay, and then the references after that. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, please let me know.